Hi everyone. I'm actually not a doctor just yet, but it is in my goals, so perhaps eventually I'll have a DR in front of my name.
Another need for a medical school spot.
So I have to click just this big green button. Okay. So it's an absolute privilege to be here today. Thank you all for attending. The research I'm presenting is partially funded by the SAGES Smart Enhanced Recovery Grant. And I'm going to start with some background. So I have some questions that I'd like to direct your minds to. They're frankly quite big and complex questions. What defines recovery after abdominal surgery? And how can we measure it? We can look at a graph now looking at the level of health and function of a patient after a major surgery. So they start at baseline, they have their surgery. There's a rapid and steep decline in health status and function, and a gradual ascent back to baseline, sometimes better. And postoperative recovery is a term that describes the period between the surgery up to the point where they reach their baseline once more. There have been several innovations in the field of abdominal surgery in the past 20 years or so, and they all aim to reduce tissue trauma and optimize perioperative care. Some innovations in the field: minimally invasive surgery, MIS, enhanced recovery pathways, ERPs or ERAS. And many studies have shown that they do decrease hospital length of stay and they do decrease postoperative complication rates. But the thing is, these are traditional audit measures that we tend to use. And the problem with this measurement approach is that it fails to reflect the complexity of the recovery process. There's more to it. So symptoms, functional status, well-being, it's not patient-centered, and it also ignores what happens to patients after hospital discharge. So a lot of qualitative studies have looked at this, and patients define recovery as being able to perform activities as they performed before surgery. So it's in an outpatient environment. So in accordance with value-based, patient-centered care, recent literature supports that the measurement of recovery should include the patient's voice through patient-reported outcomes, or PROs, which are reports of health coming directly from the patient without interpretation by others. And PRO measures, or PROMs, I'll be referring to them, are generally in the form of questionnaires. So the advantages: patients remain the key stakeholders. It captures the complexity of the recovery process, and it also gives us a better idea of the recovery trajectory because we can give these questionnaires at various time points after their surgery. So our research team recently conducted a systematic review looking at current PROMs used to assess recovery after abdominal surgery, and 3 big points came out of that. They have little evidence supporting their measurement properties, they're not developed according to optimal scientific standards, and they're not derived from modern psychometric methods. So, in light of that, the minimally invasive surgery research team at McGill University initiated a research program to develop a comprehensive, conceptually relevant, and psychometrically sound PRO measure to assess recovery after abdominal surgery. This is a nice visual representation of the entire project. It's a massive project, actually, so it's divided into 3 phases. And I'd just like to point out that the process that you see here is based on the FDA guidelines for PROM development methods. Just a little heads up, I will be integrating the results into this section. There are many steps, so it's going to maintain the fluidity in the talk. All right. So today I'm going to be focusing on the very first steps of phase 1, conceptual framework, and the very first step that we start with is the hypothesized conceptual framework of recovery after abdominal surgery. Essentially what this is, it's a list of domains that are potentially relevant to patients after their surgery. And to do this, we need to look at previous literature, and expert input should be considered. So I'm going to start with previous literature and I'll walk you through it. So we conducted a systematic review identifying existing PROMs used in the context of abdominal surgery. The search was conducted according to the PRISMA statement, and we looked at 8 databases, our inclusion criteria, and we conducted a process called content analysis to identify which domains of health are covered by the questions in these PROMs that we identified. At the end of it, 19 PROMs were identified and 18 PROMs were available for content analysis. And we analyzed according to the International Classification of Functioning Disability and Health, which is a classification system for health and functioning created by the World Health Organization. Some results. So 42 domains are potentially relevant to the process of recovery according to the literature. And next we wanted to know which domains the experts believed were relevant. Expert input. So we conducted a 2-round Delphi study. It's a survey-based approach. There are 2 rounds. So in round 1, experts rated their agreement to the domains of health identified by the review. They had a 4-point Likert scale. And in round 2, experts were given the opportunity to view the results and re-rate their agreement in light of their colleagues' responses and comments. Finally, to create the hypothesized framework, domains of recovery deemed as relevant, so 75% or more agreed or strongly agreed that it was relevant, were organized into a structured diagram. We invited 36 experts from North America and Europe. 23 participated. And here it is. So the hypothesized conceptual framework of recovery. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So we have body functions, energy and drive, sleep, pain, exercise tolerance, defecation, activities and participation, some more daily life things, dressing, walking, going to work, lifting heavy objects. So how do we validate this hypothesized framework? Well, that's when the patient interviews come in. The cool part about this project is that it's international. So we're conducting interviews in Canada, Japan, Italy, the US, as well as Brazil. Our minimum targeted sample size is 30, and we're going to continue these interviews until thematic saturation is reached. Content analysis, again, we're going to take the audio, transcribe it, and code it according to the ICF. And now we can actually update the final conceptual framework with this data. So 4 Canadian interviews have been completely analyzed, and as you can see, the original domains have been validated, and some new ones showed up. So in beige, you'll see them: respiration, emotional function, sensations associated with hearing and vestibular function. So one patient actually said, I felt very dizzy, and that caused a lot of nausea for me. Emotional functions, repair functions of the skin, and they're taking tasks independently. So some patients, for example, said, I really can't help my family much anymore. Future steps is going to be very brief. So the next thing, of course, is to generate the questions. And we need to make sure that the patients understand these questions, of course, and that's going to be done with cognitive interviews. In phase 2, we're going to reduce the number of items and form a scale. And in phase 3, we're going to validate questionnaire using traditional psychometric methods. So all this to say, it's a very rigorous process, a very long process. I can attest to that. But the important thing is, and the exciting part is, what we can do with such a measure. It's going to be a sensitive, patient-centered measure of recovery after abdominal surgery. It's going to inform clinician-patient communication about recovery expectations. So a lot of you here are surgeons. If you think about the conversations you have with your patient when they come into your office, doctor, when am I going to go to work again? Am I on the right track? There's a lot of questions we can't quite answer, but this kind of tool can help with that. It's going to empower patients to track their own recovery and potentially identify complications at earlier time points. We aim to use various modern data collection platforms. So imagine a day where a patient can just take their iPhone, fill out the questions, get an idea of how they're doing, and that's seamlessly going to integrate into their medical records. And last but not least, to measure is to know. If you can't measure, you can't improve. This is going to provide a sensitive measure of recovery to be used in comparative effectiveness research of innovations in abdominal surgery, so one can only imagine how that's going to impact the field. And with that, I end my talk. Thank you very much.